The first thing everyone warns you about when you move onto Creston Drive, tucked in the hills above Beverly Hills, is not the coyotes, the parking, or the narrow curves of the road. It's the house at the sharp bend before the ridge, the one where James Cagney supposedly spent his quieter years, long after the roles that made him famous. A house so oddly still, neighbors say the air around it feels like it refuses to move. The new owners, Daniel and Elise, didn't believe any of that. They were too practical for ghost stories, too young to be afraid of old Hollywood myths. They bought the place because of the light, thick, amber sunlight that fell through the high windows in late afternoon like honey, and because the home still carried its 1930s bones. Smooth plaster walls, stone archways, saltillo tile floors, and in the living room, beneath a pitched ceiling of old timber beams, sat the detail that confused everyone. A grand piano so heavy and so old that removing it would have cost more than refinishing it. The piano wasn't listed in the sale. It was simply there. The very first night, Daniel noticed something he brushed off as fatigue. While Elise unpacked the kitchen boxes, he walked into the living room to size up the space for his work desk. The piano's lid was closed, dusty, but one of the keys, a single white key near the lower register, was pressed down. Not stuck, not chipped, simply lowered slightly deeper than the others. He lifted it gently. It rose back into place. He didn't mention it, but the next night Elise did. They were eating takeout late. Their furniture hadn't even arrived when she froze mid-bite and stared toward the dark living room. "Do you hear that?" Daniel muted the TV. A deep, hollow sound echoed faintly through the house, like someone testing the resonance of a wall with the side of their fist. A rhythmic knock, but too soft to be a person. Thump, 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 slow, measured, spaced exactly the same each time. It seemed to come from inside the plaster, as if the wall had a heartbeat. Daniel got up, ran his palm along the living room wall, and felt nothing. The knocking stopped, and then one piano key pressed itself down with a feather-light tap. Not slammed, not dramatic, just a single, deliberate note that didn't fully play, a soft mechanical depression, as if someone touched it without intending to make a sound. Elise whispered, "Daniel, tell me you saw that." He had. They both had. But he refused to let fear shape the moment. "It's temperature change," he said. "Old wood expanding at night." Except the temperature hadn't changed. The room felt unnaturally stable, one of those still, heavy pockets of air you only notice in old buildings. Almost like the house was holding its breath. They ran a few simple tests, logical ones. They checked the HVAC vents, turned off all electronics, tapped along the interior walls, listening for hollow spaces or loose studs. Everything felt solid. The home inspector's report had been clean. Wiring updated, beams reinforced, no rodents, no water damage. And yet something about the walls felt dense, as if the house had a kind of weight to it, a pressure behind the paint. The neighbors didn't help. The next morning, while Elise was trimming dead leaves off the old rose bushes that lined the front steps, Mrs. Kessler from next door approached with a dog that looked too old to stand on its own. "You moved into the Cagney place," she said, almost apologetically. "He was a good man, you know. But that house never softened." Elise tried to laugh it off. "What do you mean, never softened?" Mrs. Kessler adjusted her sunglasses. "You'll see. Some homes keep the energy of the people who lived in them, and some keep the parts they never resolved." Before Elise could ask anything else, the woman walked away, dragging her unwilling dog behind her. That night, the second strange thing happened, the one they couldn't rationalize. Elise woke at 2:41 a.m., thirsty, and walked into the kitchen. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't need to. The oversized window above the sink let in the glow of the street lamp outside. And from there she could see it clearly. The living room, the piano, the outline of the sofa, and a figure standing slightly to the right of the piano. Not detailed, not ghost-like, just the shape of a man, still upright as if listening. The figure wasn't facing her. It was turned toward the piano. Elise didn't scream. She couldn't. Her throat locked. But when she blinked, it was gone. The room was empty. She didn't wake Daniel. She didn't know how to explain what she saw. Instead, she walked into the living room to prove to herself that nothing was wrong. Everything was normal, except for the piano lid. It was open, not all the way, just enough to expose the first row of keys. And one key, the exact same key as before, was pressed down again, pressed and held, as if by a finger that wasn't there. Elise whispered into the stillness, barely audible, "Mr. Cagney?" Elise hardly slept the rest of the night. She lay stiff beside Daniel, replaying the shape she'd seen near the piano. Not a dream, not a reflection, not her imagination. The figure had been too still, too grounded in the room, like someone waiting for a cue that never came. By sunrise, she convinced herself to tell him, even if he dismissed it. But when she walked into the living room with her coffee, sleep-deprived and heavy-eyed, she stopped so abruptly that some of the coffee sloshed over the rim. The piano lid was shut, not just lowered, but fully closed, aligned perfectly with the dust pattern on the polished wood, as if no one had touched it. Daniel walked in behind her. "What's wrong?" She pointed. "It was open last night. Half open. I swear." He didn't roll his eyes, but she could feel the skepticism. They had both grown up in practical households, math teachers, nurses, people who believed that everything had a cause. Elise wasn't someone who jumped at shadows. That made it worse. Daniel tried a gentle tone. "Maybe you closed it before bed? Or maybe it fell." "It doesn't fall," she interrupted. "It's too heavy, and I didn't close it." He sighed, not dismissing her entirely, but not ready to believe her either. He lifted the lid. The wood groaned softly, old hinges flexing. The smell of aged felt mixing with the faintest scent of lemon oil. He held it open, then let go. It didn't budge. This wasn't something that could drift down on its own. They ate breakfast in silence, but the house was not silent. Twice, from somewhere deeper in the hallway, they heard the faintest knock, not a human knock, not sharp or purposeful, but the dull thud of something shifting inside the walls. Pipes? Wood? Settling? They kept giving the same excuses, but none of the sounds matched the rhythm of a house adjusting to morning warmth. It was the same slow, deliberate tempo as the night before. Around noon, an unexpected visitor arrived. A man in his 70s, leaning on a cane, paused at their gate. His clothes were immaculate, crisp slacks, iron shirt, no jacket despite the warm weather. He held a set of keys that seemed too old to be for anything modern. Daniel glanced through the window before answering the door. "You expecting someone?" "No." When they opened the door, the man gave a polite nod. "Apologies," he said, voice firm but courteous. "My name's Arthur Delvecchio. I used to be the property manager here, back in the 80s and early 90s, when Mr. Cagney still had occasional staff." Elise blinked. "You worked for him?" "Indirectly," Arthur corrected. "Handled the grounds, some repairs, private deliveries. Nothing glamorous." He looked past them, into the house, not rudely, more like someone revisiting a memory. "I heard someone finally bought the place. Been empty a long while." Daniel stepped aside politely. "Would you like to come in?" Arthur shook his head immediately. "No. No, thank you. I don't step inside anymore. I stopped doing that years ago." The way he said it made Elisa's arms prickle. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Can I ask why?" Arthur hesitated, then tapped the cane softly against the concrete. "There's a density to this house. Pressure. We all felt it, even when Cagney was alive." He glanced toward the living room window, where the top of the piano lid was barely visible through the glass. "Especially around that piano." Elise and Daniel exchanged a look, the first moment of shared unease since moving in. Elise asked carefully, "Was he attached to it?" Arthur's jaw tightened. "Deeply. But he didn't play it. Not in the end. He just kept it tuned. Said a home without a ready piano was a home that forgot how to breathe." He paused, adjusting his grip on the cane. "But after he passed, people started complaining. Tenants, short-term renters, even cleaners. Same stories, same rooms, same hours of the night." Daniel tried keeping the conversation rational. "Stories like what?" Arthur's eyes lifted to Daniel's with a seriousness that felt heavier than the house's walls. They all heard someone in the living room, after midnight, never playing, never walking, just standing. Elise felt something cold slide through her chest. Arthur turned as if ready to leave, but then added, "If anything feels wrong, don't ignore it. This house doesn't respond well to denial." Cagney had a presence, powerful one, and places hold on to energy like his. He walked away slowly, leaving Daniel and Elise frozen at the doorway. Inside, the air felt thicker, like stepping into a space that had been waiting quietly while they stood outside. That night, Elise insisted on sleeping with the bedroom door open, not out of bravery, but because closing it made her feel cut off, trapped inside something she didn't yet understand. She lay awake, listening for every shift, every breath of wind, every imagined footstep. She was drifting towards sleep when Daniel suddenly sat up, tense, listening. She grabbed his arm. What do you hear?" he whispered, barely audible. The piano just clicked. They both listened. The house was motionless. No footsteps, no wind, just the electric hum of the refrigerator far away in the kitchen. Then a soft, unmistakable sound drifted down the hallway. A single piano key, pressed slowly, pressed deliberately, and this time, the key struck just hard enough to produce the faintest whisper of a note. Not a melody, not a warning, just the beginning of something. And the entire house, every wall, every bit of old plaster, seemed to tighten around that sound, as if recognizing it, as if remembering it. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Daniel didn't sleep the rest of the night. Neither did Elise. They kept the bedroom door wide open, listening for the next sound, the next key, the next shift in the air. But after that single whisper of a note, the house fell into a strange, unnatural stillness, not quiet, but held, as if something inside the walls was waiting to see if they would acknowledge it. By morning, both of them were exhausted. When the light finally began pushing through the curtains, Elise stood and walked slowly toward the living room, every step measured, as if she expected to find someone standing there again. Daniel followed behind her. The piano lid was open again. Not halfway, not slightly, fully open, like someone had lifted it with intention. On the glossy black lacquer surface of the piano, faint marks made her stop. At first they looked like smudges from the night before, but when she leaned closer, she froze. They weren't smudges. They were fingerprints, perfect, clear, and impossibly precise, as if someone with clean, dry hands had rested their fingertips directly on the lid and pressed lightly. 5 prints, a full hand. Daniel leaned beside her, squinting. "Could be ours." "They're too large," she said quietly. "And Daniel, we never touched that part of the piano." He swallowed hard but said nothing. They spent the morning cleaning, unpacking boxes, doing anything they could to convince themselves that life was normal. But no matter where they moved in the house, they felt it, the subtle pressure of being watched. Not stalked, not hunted, just observed, evaluated, like a performer under stage lights, waiting for someone to shout, "Action!" Around noon, Elise found something she hadn't noticed before. A narrow built-in cabinet in the hallway wall, painted the same shade of cream as the plaster. The latch was stiff, but it opened with a dry crack. Inside were old, yellowing envelopes, a pair of thick white gloves for handling sheet music, and a small folded cloth embroidered with the initials JC in ornate script. The cloth smelled faintly of cedar and ancient cologne. And at the back, tucked between 2 wooden braces, was a stack of brittle sheet music handwritten notes, corrections scribbled in pencil, faint erasures. None of the pieces had titles, just dates, all from the last decade of Cagney's life. Daniel whispered, "He was composing? I thought he stopped performing long before that," Elise murmured. The bottom of the stack held a single sheet more worn than the others. Only 4 bars of music were written. A short, incomplete phrase. It looked familiar somehow, not from any song they recognized, but from something they'd felt in this house. Elise ran her finger along the page. "That one key we keep hearing, it's one of these notes." Daniel stared at the paper. It's like someone is trying to. He cut himself off, even thinking it felt ridiculous. They placed the sheet music back carefully, closed the cabinet, and tried to shake off the dread curling in their stomachs. But the day didn't let them forget. Around 3 in the afternoon, a sudden sharp crack echoed through the house so loud Elise dropped the glass she was holding. They both ran toward the living room, hearts pounding. The sound had come from the plaster wall behind the piano. A small section of the plaster no bigger than a coin had split. A thin, perfect hairline crack now ran from the baseboard up to the bottom edge of the window frame. It hadn't been there earlier. It looked fresh, new, like the house had clenched too hard. Daniel reached out and pressed the wall lightly. It feels warm. Elise touched it too. The surface was warm, almost as if someone had been standing there with their palm pressed to the plaster only moments before. I think, she whispered, this house remembers something, or someone. That evening, trying to distract themselves, they walked through the neighborhood to get fresh air. The sun was dipping behind the hills, the sky turning amber. Most of the homes looked untouched by time-trimmed hedges, clipped lawns, Spanish tiles glowing in the dusk. At the corner, they met Mr. Riley, a man who had lived on the street for 50 years. He was watering his citrus trees when he noticed them passing and lifted his hand in a tired greeting. You're the new folks in the Cagney house? Elise nodded. Yes, we moved in 3 days ago. He studied them a moment, not rudely, but with a recognition that sent a chill down Elise's spine. Has the piano started yet? Daniel stopped walking. Excuse me? Mr. Riley turned off the hose and leaned heavily against the fence. It starts with 1 key. Always 1. That's how it was for the couple who lived there before you. And the woman before them. And the renters before that. Elise's pulse thickened in her throat. What does it mean? She asked. Riley shook his head. I don't think it means anything. I think it's memory. A residue. That house wasn't lively like the others. It always had a kind of hard energy. Walls too thick, air too heavy. Cagney loved it, but he wasn't a gentle man. He wasn't cruel, but he had a presence. Still does, if you ask me. He shifted his gaze toward their street. Sometimes things stay where they were strongest. Daniel exhaled slowly. Did anything else happen? Anything besides the piano? Riley hesitated. Then, people saw a man, near the piano, standing, listening, like he wanted to hear a note played the right way, or maybe the final way he'd intended. Elise felt her heart sink. He added softly, just keep your calm. Don't react too strongly. That house feeds on attention. Always has. On the walk home, neither of them spoke. Inside, the house felt darker than it should at dusk, as if the air absorbed more light than it reflected. They checked every room, every corridor, every shadow. At the end, they found themselves back in the living room, standing before the piano like it was the center of gravity pulling them inward. The sheet music Elise had touched earlier lay on the floor, now not scattered, not thrown, simply placed there, parallel with the piano bench. Daniel's voice was barely a whisper. Elise, did you leave that open? No. They stood frozen, staring at the 4 silent bars of music on the floor. And then, without warning, the same single key depressed itself again slowly, carefully, like a finger lowering with intention. A faint note rang out. Not random, not mechanical. A note from the unfinished composition. The first note. The night they found the sheet music on the floor, something shifted inside Daniel. Fear had exhausted him. Logic had failed him. Denial had collapsed under too much evidence. For the first time, he knelt beside the piano, not with suspicion, but with a quiet, steady acceptance. Elise watched him push the bench back, sit down, and rest his hands gently on the keys. Not playing, just listening. The house felt different instantly, less tense, less resistant, almost patient. Daniel lifted the 4-bar sheet from the floor. If he was trying to finish something, he said quietly, maybe it's not about scaring us. Maybe he wants completion. Elise stood near the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, afraid but understanding. Just play what's written. Nothing more. He pressed the first note. The same note they'd been hearing night after night. This time, the house didn't react with knocks or cold air. It seemed to exhale, the tension easing from the walls. He played the second, then the third. Soft, careful, imperfect. And when he reached the fourth note, the final written one, something subtle moved in the room. Not a person, not a shadow, just a shift in weight, a thinning of pressure, like a presence leaning in to hear more clearly. Daniel hesitated. There were no more notes written, only blank staff lines trailing off into nothing. Elise whispered. He never finished it. Daniel looked up at her. Maybe that's why he's still here. For a long moment he sat frozen. Then, trusting instinct more than talent, he pressed one final key, a soft, resolving note that completed the phrase naturally, gently, the way a tired composer might have ended a thought. The sound lingered, and the house eased. The air warmed slightly. The weight in the walls loosened. The invisible pressure that had followed them since the first night dissolved with the fading ring of the last note. Elise felt tears in her eyes without knowing why. Daniel closed the lid slowly. The piano didn't resist. It stayed shut. For the first time since they moved in, the house felt like a house, just a building of plaster and old beams, not a memory trapped in its own echo. That night they slept with the bedroom door open again. But there were no footsteps, no knocks, no whispered notes, just silence, a peaceful, accepted silence. And from that night on, the piano never played by itself again. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.